Bronze Age Britain was not an island unto itself. Archaeologists have uncovered objects from remarkably distant places, and among the most striking are pieces of Baltic amber. These yellow and orange fragments of fossilized tree resin, warm and luminous to the touch, were among the most prized decorative materials in Bronze Age Europe. Their trade routes stretched from the coasts of what are now Poland and Denmark, across the entire European continent, reaching Britain, southern France, and eventually the Mediterranean world. The Baltic amber found in Britain clusters heavily in wealthy graves from the early and Middle Bronze Age, with a particular concentration in the Wessex region. The geographic origin of amber can be confirmed through infrared spectroscopy and mass spectrometry. Baltic amber contains a distinctive chemical marker known as succinic acid, which allows researchers to distinguish it cleanly from Mediterranean amber and other fossilized resins found elsewhere. Systematic analyses by researchers including Gail Ness have confirmed that the overwhelming majority of amber excavated in Britain does indeed originate from the Baltic region, not from any local source. This chemical fingerprinting technique has something in common with the ancestry DNA testing services that have become enormously popular in recent years. Companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA have sparked a widespread desire to trace mixed and tangled bloodlines through a small saliva sample. The isotope and spectroscopic methods used in archaeology ask a parallel question, but direct it at objects rather than people. Where do you come from? And the answers these two methods produce tend to point toward the same surprising conclusion. The world we imagine as clearly bounded and neatly separated has, in fact, always been hybrid and in motion. But there is a colder reading of this evidence worth taking seriously. What archaeology calls European connectivity in the Bronze Age may be, at its core, a record of civilizational gradient. The amber that traveled from the Baltic to Wessex is not necessarily proof of mutual and equal exchange. It may be better understood as evidence of a differential in productive capacity, where regions with more advanced manufacturing exported craftsmanship and information, while peripheral areas exported raw materials and symbolic allegiance. A chieftain in Britain or Northern Europe who devoted substantial resources to acquiring a string of Mediterranean glass beads and carried them into the grave certainly demonstrates the reach of the network. But it also suggests that the network was not flat. Some participants controlled it. Others were simply incorporated by it. Alongside amber, one of the most compelling categories of Bronze Age finds is the glass and faience bead. In graves from southern Britain and northern Europe, researchers have recovered small beads made from Egyptian faience or early glass, whose chemical composition points to an origin somewhere along the eastern Mediterranean coast, possibly Egypt itself. If this identification holds, it means that between roughly 1500 and 1200 BC, a long-distance exchange network already existed connecting Egypt, the Aegean, Central Europe, and the far northwest of the continent. The elite communities of Bronze Age Britain were, in some fashion, participants in a system that stretched to the edges of the ancient world. This kind of discovery tends to split audiences into two camps. One side argues that ancient humans have been systematically underestimated, and points to glass beads, tin provenance studies, and evidence of open sea navigation as proof that prehistoric people were far more capable and far more connected than mainstream textbooks acknowledge. The other side urges caution about any narrative that sounds like rewriting history, worried that each exaggerated claim provides ammunition for pseudo-archaeological ideas about lost civilizations or prehistoric contact with advanced outside forces. Both responses, however, tend to miss a sharper and more uncomfortable question. The entire Bronze Age globalization narrative is, at its structural core, a story about wealthy people acquiring luxury goods across very long distances, and archaeologists finding that story fascinating. Very few papers ask whether the people who actually collected amber on the Baltic shoreline had better or worse lives because of the trade network that carried their raw materials southward. We excavate elite graves, reconstruct elite exchange systems, and then describe the results as human connectivity. But that framing is not the history of everyone. It is the history of a small minority, presented as though it were universal. Those without prestige goods left no grave goods. Without grave goods, they left no narratives. Everything we think we know about Bronze Age globalization was told to us by the burials of the wealthy. The objects themselves almost certainly passed through many hands before reaching their final resting places. No single trader carried Egyptian glass from the Nile Delta to the English Channel. The more plausible picture is a series of nested regional networks, each operating at a local scale, with objects passing from node to node and gradually migrating over vast distances. The anthropologist Timothy Earle described this kind of arrangement as an exchange chain, a system in which no individual participant knows the ultimate source or final destination of the goods they handle, yet the overall structure functions as a coherent long-distance network. Once we stop romanticizing this picture, it takes on a less appealing shape. The competitive advantage of every intermediary node in such a system rests on a single foundation: information monopoly. The middleman must ensure that the supplier never learns who the buyer is, and that the buyer never learns who the supplier is. The moment the two ends of the chain make direct contact, the intermediary's profits collapse to zero. The exchange chain is, in its deep logic, a system sustained by structural information asymmetry across regions. The underlying mechanism is not so different from the logic of ticket scalpers, commodity brokers, or certain categories of business that survive entirely by controlling access to connections rather than creating anything themselves. 3,000 years have passed. The business model has not fundamentally changed. This system was also, in a specific sense, decentralized. There was no central warehouse, no unified logistics standard, no coordinating authority. Each node simply managed its own relationships. Amber collectors on the Baltic coast sold to inland traders. Those traders carried goods across the Rhine. Others moved them toward the Channel coast. The network operated on trust, reciprocity, and the social capital built through repeated exchange. Enthusiasts of decentralized technology sometimes claim that cryptographic protocols can eliminate the rent-seeking behavior of middlemen by rendering all transactions transparent and direct. What the Bronze Age suggests is that humans spent millennia failing to solve this problem through social organization alone, even when the incentives to do so were obvious. That is worth sitting with. The question of who actually held power within this system is also worth asking more carefully. The archaeological category of the big man, the high-status individual whose wealth appears in elaborate burials, may represent not just the most physically formidable member of a community, but the person who controlled the most connections. In a world where prestige depended on access to distant goods, the ability to maintain relationships across multiple nodes of the exchange chain was itself a form of power. The warrior and the network broker may have been the same person, or they may have been rivals. The grave goods alone cannot tell us. Barry Cunliffe, an archaeologist at Oxford, proposed what he called the Atlantic route theory in his work on Atlantic Britain. He argued that a continuous maritime corridor ran along the Western European coast from Morocco and the Iberian Peninsula northward through France and Britain to Ireland and Scandinavia, and that this corridor served as a major artery for the movement of goods, people, and ideas throughout the Bronze Age. The theory has attracted criticism for overemphasizing maritime factors, but its lasting contribution is the reminder that Britain was not a marginal footnote to European prehistory. It was an active participant in, and in some periods a destination point for, continental networks of exchange. This argument acquired unexpected contemporary relevance during the years surrounding the Brexit referendum. Historians and journalists on the Remain side of that debate cited the deep prehistory of cross-channel and Atlantic connectivity as evidence that Britain's entanglement with continental Europe was a geographic and cultural inevitability. Those on the Leave side emphasized Britain's identity as a maritime civilization historically distinct from the continent. Archaeological findings were recruited by both camps, and Cunliffe's Atlantic route theory in particular proved useful to those who wished to argue that Britain's deepest roots lay in the Atlantic world rather than in Europe. Cunliffe himself made no such political inference. But the episode illustrates something that recurs throughout the history of archaeology. We are never only studying the past. We are always, simultaneously, using the past to argue for conclusions we have already reached about the present. The scientific tracing of Bronze Age objects to their geographic origins also opens a question that feels distinctly contemporary. To whom do these things belong? When chemical analysis confirms that amber found in an English grave came from the Baltic coast, and that a glass bead buried alongside it came from Egypt, th.